Hey, this is Sam Sanden, and you are listening to Salt and Light. My passion is for you to live out your faith in everyday life, fully alive, and in turn to see the culture around you transform. With a unique perspective as a Swedish immigrant, pastor, small business owner, and politically engaged citizen, my prayer is that this podcast will encourage, inspire, equip, challenge, and mobilize you to become the salt and light God created you to be at this exact moment in history. What a time to be alive, friends. Let's go. All right, thank you so much for watching today. We have a great guest with us this afternoon. It's a dear friend, Michael Federer. You'll be thrilled to hear what God is doing in his life and how God is opening the doors. And I really feel he has a message for the season. We're in a very tumultuous time here in America. And to understand where we're at, we need to know where we're coming from. And that's something that is really close to Michael's heart. And he's co-written a few books together with his father, William Federer. The latest one is Muscular Christianity, which is a great read looking at how faith inspired the YMCA and so many more things in regards to men becoming men. And we'll see if we'll touch that as well. But Michael, great to have you with me this morning. We would love for you to just share what is on your heart. And maybe just tell, how did you get to the point where you're at here today and with what God is doing and the doors is opening for you. So welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sam. And I want to say that you've been a great encouragement to me. I really enjoyed visiting you at Father's House Church. And what we were saying, that was 8 or 9 months ago already. I can't believe it's time has flown since then. But no, you've been an encouragement to me. And as you mentioned, I've worked with my father. I joke somewhere between 3 and 30 years. But the best I can describe it, we're the American Minute, Team American Minute, and we use history to make sense of what's going on today. Now, my father is the history expert. The analogy I like to use is he's the tea leaves. He's the concentrated source of everything. I've been steeped in his message long enough to become some sort of tea at this point. But yes, it's great to be with you here, Sam.
I love that. I love how you kind of just got roped in by osmosis, and I love to see the fruit and how the message that Bill has been sharing for many years now is taking a new whole life. And as you are bringing a different perspective, but the truth is we need history more than ever, because if we don't understand where we're coming from, we don't know where we're going. And I think we've seen a concerted effort in the last, 15 years at least of really undoing and as Kamala so famously said, to be unburdened what has been, right? And we think this is a new thing, but this is something that's been going on for a very long time in the whole thing of rewriting history, erasing the past so that we forget our heritage, where we're coming from, and the foundations that we have. Because when we're a clean slate, it's very easy to be influenced by what's going around us. And the social media, the social contagions, there's so much impressions and so many opinions. And if we don't have a foundation, obviously in the Word, but also understanding how the Word of God relates to our history and our foundation. So what do you see happening right now? What's going on in our nation in regards to where we're going, and maybe even in light of the recent election in New York, or because socialism is not a new thing. It's been around the block for quite a while.
You're absolutely right, Sam. Yeah, one of the messages I've been sharing lately has to do with why are we so divided? Now, there's a lot of ways you can tackle this question, but I say first and foremost, we need to go back to history. So people look at what's happening in the world today, and some of them think this is this organic thing. This was just bound to happen. However, when you look at it through the lens of history, a different story is told. Now, history, like you said, has kind of become the currency of truth. It just like in mathematics, you've got your X and your Y axis. You can plot a couple points, but if you have enough points, you can draw a line through it and you can start to see where things are heading. History is similar. Now, my father, he's known to look at the 6,000 years of written recorded history. So all the records we have. And what he finds in that is that the United States is unique. Out of all that 6,000 years of history, what we have here is very rare. People governing themselves that is very rare. The other example of people doing it with any degree of success is the 400 years prior to King Saul, referred to now as the Hebrew Republic. But we are on our 250th year in the United States, and as most people know, that is kind of a crucial make or break year. So when I look at what we see, through the lens of history, you recognize quickly that the division that we're fighting is not an organic thing. No, it's the fruits of seeds of division that were planted much earlier, namely post-World War II.
Yep.
So I like to go into that. We do have a book, Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present, How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. Nice, short and sweet subtitle there. But but I go to chapter 57, and this is kind of my burning message right now. A lot of people know it. You probably know it, Sam, but it's I want it to be a household history lesson. Yuri Bezmenov, KGB defector. So why do I bring this up? Well, post World War II, warfare, modern warfare as we know it, changes. So World War II, the full military strength of the United States is put on display for the world to see. Yep. After World War II, enemies of the United States say, look, if you want to defeat the United States, maybe don't do it on the battlefield. No, you need to rot the apple from the inside. Or as Antonio Gramsci, Italian communist philosopher, would say, it's the long march through the institutions. Yep. Now, why do I like Yuri Bezmenov, or the lesson that he gives us? Because it's coming from the horse's mouth, if you will. It's the person who was sowing division telling you exactly how, in 4 concise steps, how he's going to divide America, how he's going to weaken us by causing infighting. And when you look at what we're seeing in the United States today, it just really it allows you to approach this situation with deeper understanding, and that allows you to be assertive where you need to be, but also compassionate towards others. So I'll get into those steps if you'd like.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I think, like you said, we think this is a new thing, that this is a newfound truth, that, we hear like, well, socialism isn't working because it hasn't been done the right way. Well, it's been done every way, and every time it's been done, it's failed miserably. And it seems like every generation has to relearn this lesson. And I hope that we can get to a point where we can actually learn from previous generations rather than having to learn the hard truth ourselves, because it's a lot easier to learn through someone else's experience than having to go through it ourselves. So talk about this, because the East realized that sheer might will not bring America down, and it had to be something else. So what are these 4 points, and how do they operate in today, and how can we be aware when we see the schemes of literally the enemy at play?
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention something that you had just said there and just kind of play on that. You're right. This is something that each generation thinks, oh, this is a good thing. In theory, socialism sounds good. Everyone thinks equal amount of stuff, equal opportunity. It sounds good. However, when theory meets reality, we have a record of it. It's called history. And to that effect, so this book alone, there's over 100 short chapters, and it goes all the way back to ancient history and brings you up through the 2000s. And what you find is exactly what you said. It doesn't matter where on the globe geographically, doesn't matter what time period, socialism typically results in loss of freedom and loss of life, and often on a very massive scale. So getting back to what we were saying, to get into these 4 steps. So we were saying how after World War II, they said if you want to defeat the United States, you don't do it on the battlefield. Well, where do they fight then?
Right.
Enter Cold War tactics, or fifth column warfare. Now, where does the term fifth column warfare come from? Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, was known to use these tactics. Now, a typical military formation during this time would have 2 columns in the front, 2 flanks on the side. But where was this 5th column, Sam? It was in the enemy's camp, and they were simply stirring up people. They were creating confusion and sowing division. So they would say things to the effect of, I hear Philip of Macedon isn't such a bad guy. I hear he's liberating cities, not conquering them. And these are enemies saying it to the unknowing population. They think it's just another citizen in their camp. So by the time Philip arrives, the city's so divided they can't mount a proper defense. But what does any of that have to do with the United States? Well, chapter 57 of Socialism goes through Yuri Bezmenov. Now, he's a KGB agent that defects. And in 1984, he goes on G. Edward Griffin's show. It basically became a popular interview, but we've kind of seen this history be pushed away. But in that, he says exactly what we're going to go over. He goes, there are 4 steps that we've been using all across the world, but namely in the United States. And the goal is to divide people. We don't care if it's rich versus poor, black versus white, Christian versus non-Christian. As long as we can pit them against each other, that's what we want to do. So what are the steps? It's demoralization, destabilization, crises, and normalization. Now, demoralization, it's just what it sounds like. They want to detach you from the belief that this is a good place to live. They want to say bad things about the United States history. And here's the thing, it takes 15 to 20 years for this demoralization period to be complete. Why that long? Well, they basically need to infiltrate systems like Yuri mentions. He says we want to infiltrate your media and your school systems, as well as other businesses and military, etc. But he says those 2 first, because that allows you to then basically capture one generation of young people, be with them as they grow to maturity. And if you can indoctrinate them and get them to believe these things like, maybe America isn't such a good place to live, then they start doing it to each other. So essentially what we have here, and Yuri does go on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, the quota is overfulfilled. It is Americans doing it to Americans now. General Andropov would never have expected this level of success. So that's the first stage.
Yeah, and we've seen that play out for a long time, especially in education, where it's been a shift since, even before the 60s, but especially in the 60s when things really started to shift with the professors and teachers, and we see that in our school system today, where most teachers don't understand that the tactics or the way they teach and how things are approached, it's actually not a normative or our normal or neutral way, but it's actually a way to stir this up and to bring this in. And
you're absolutely right.
And we can look back to even a few presidents ago where you had Barack Obama traveling the world apologizing for America. And when you have the leaders of the free world apologizing for our uniqueness, and I think this whole uniqueness has been so downplayed or written off that we don't understand, like you said, that we are in a very unique place in America where we think that the rest of the world is just like us or better, but we have a freedom that is unparalleled. And
come on.
And again, if they can get us to write off what makes us special and the foundations we have, and then all these new ideas sounds, even though they're old, sounds new and fresh and it appeals to the heartstring. But these things have been tried over and over again, even as early as in 1620 when the Pilgrims came and tried socialism for a year and it failed miserably, and they learned quickly to change that. But yeah, right. This demoralization, it's been going on for a long time. It didn't happen in a vacuum, didn't happen overnight. I saw Eric Metaxas say something recently that it seemed to happen really slow until it didn't. And I think that's what's coming in now. It's really fast and accelerating because these 15 years, which probably been more like 15 years of demoralizing our nation, it's starting to bear fruit. And we need to recapture the uniqueness and fight for it. We've taken it for granted. I think when you have freedom, if you didn't have to fight for it initially, it is easy to take it for granted and think that it's something that always will be there. But as we are realizing, and what we saw in the last 5 years, really, especially with COVID, how quickly our freedoms were trampled on. And because we didn't know our history and didn't know our foundation or what the Constitution stood for, we allowed lawmakers to quickly stifle freedoms that were written in the very foundation. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, the like you said, it seemed to be this slow drip in a bucket. Now that was actually intentional. They wanted this to be a subtle change because if it happened all at once, you'd see
Yep.
Americans up in arms saying, "Hey, this isn't the way of life that I stand for." But if they can make it subtle, if they can make it
Yep.
like I said, a drip in a bucket, if it's constant, you don't see the bucket filling up in front of your eyes, but walk away and come back, and sure enough, that bucket's not going to look the same way it was when you left. So 15 to 20 years to demoralize, but then the next stage moves faster and the next stage moves faster. And we're at the point of crises. And we'll get into that. But destabilization, so you've got demoralization. Destabilization basically means infiltrating areas like the economy and the military, things that can actually disrupt and cause pressure for Americans. And then this sets them up for the next stage of crisis. So
Yep.
we'll kind of move past destabilization, but that basically is what it sounds like. You want to disrupt the stability of critical foundational U.S. factors, so namely economy and defense systems. But where we're at now is crisis. Now, what does crisis have to do with anything? We'll give a historic example of this, but also just to put the imagery in your audience's head. Picture a deck of cards. Everything is neatly organized. It's the way it should be. Throw that deck of cards up in the air. Whenever it lands, you have room to rearrange them, to put them in a different order. This is how crisis works. Yep. So Machiavelli, he's kind of known as the historic example of the ends justifying the means. He's often referred to as the father of modern politics. And what was Machiavelli's deal? Well, in the late 1400s, he wanted to unite all of Italy. Italy was a bunch of city-states, and occasionally they would fight amongst each other. And Machiavelli thought, if I can get everyone to unite under one Italy and stop the infighting, this would be a really good thing. However, he's willing to leave his morals on the shelf while he does this. So what you get is someone who's willing to pay criminals to create panic. Then he can ride in and act like the hero, put down the rebellions, fix the tumultuous times, and everyone says, wow, what a hero. Maybe we should unite under his rule. However, what they don't realize is that he manufactured the crisis. So right. Another way of saying that is Machiavelli's the type of guy that would light your house on fire from the back, walk around, knock on your door, say, hey, your house is on fire. Don't worry. I brought you this fire extinguisher to sell you. You would buy the fire extinguisher. You might even thank him for being there, all the while not knowing that it's him responsible for the crisis. And in this crisis, he's aiming to usurp power. That's what we're seeing a lot of today. Typical, like with Yuri Bezmenov, he says 6 weeks for a crisis. So I've got too many rabbit trails going right now, so I'll just keep going if that's okay. But
go for it.
Yeah. So when we talk about crises, I'm going to mention a term, and then we'll kind of update it. But where does the term idiot come from? Well, if you go back to ancient Greece, this is when they were a true democracy. Now, we are a constitutional, democratically elected republic. We are a republic with representatives, meaning we can go about our day, and representatives that hold the values that we have, that we've elected to represent us, get to participate in these discussions all the time, while we go on with our lives and continue to monitor it when we can. In a democracy, you have to be present. Now, I'm going to sound like my father here for a second, so you might have heard some of this, Sam, but political discussions, politics just means the business of the city. The root word of politics is polis. That means city. Indianapolis, Minneapolis. So politics is the business of the city. In a democracy, everyone attends these meetings and they participate. But let's say you had a busy week, you had a family event, or your farm needed extra attention, and you were unable to participate in these discussions. Well, when you return, you weren't you weren't lacking intellectual capacity to understand what was being talked about. No, you were just missing the information. You were ignorant of what was being talked about.
Yeah.
The term for this became idiote. However, this term resurfaces later with German philosophers Hegel and Karl Marx, but they add an adjective in front of it. They say the useful idiot.
Yeah.
Now, why would someone want you to be ignorant? Why would someone want you to be kept in the dark? The short answer is they want you to be pawns on their chessboard. The less you know about what's really happening in the country, the less you're going to stand up against it, the less you're going to tie these crises to you losing your freedoms. This was all part of the plan.
Yeah. Well, we see that, right, with Queers for Palestine, which is an oxymoron, right, where people are so emotionally charged that they don't know what they're doing. They just respond to what's happening. And we need to be aware of these things because, like you said, it's you're missing that information. It's not that we don't have the mental capacity, but we have to understand what's going on and we have to be engaged. And the challenge with a democratic republic that we have, right, is that if we are not engaging in the process, we are abdicating the role we have as citizens. And we've seen that in many elections, even recently. So we just had a city election here, but going back to the presidential election last year, we had a governor's race here in Washington State, and numbers seems to suggest that 1.5 million Christians did not vote in that election. So here you have the opportunity to be engaged, and if those people had voted and voted biblical values, we would have changed every single seat, every single initiative, everything on the ballot could have been represented by someone that's Bible-based or Bible-believing, but we just sit out and we have this fatalistic attitude that, whatever happens, happens. God is sovereign, but it's we are those useful idiots in a sense by sitting out and thinking that, maybe we think we don't have a chance because it's all rigged or it's too many of this party or that party, but if you don't try, you will never succeed. For some reason, we think that it's more spiritual to sit out instead of being part of the process, and that's another one of those demoralizing things, right? If you can get people to believe that their vote doesn't count and they stay home, well, then it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy.
You're
I think
absolutely right.
And I think we have so many churches where they don't even talk about the elections or talk about the importance of voting or voting biblically. And myself, I'm a naturalized citizen. I was born and raised in Sweden. Came here when I was 24, and then I finally became a citizen. But the difference between me having a green card and being a citizen was that with the green card, I could not vote, and I could not serve on a jury of my peers. So those were really the two only differences between a citizen and having a green card. So for then, to have the prized American passport as a citizen, the two responsibilities and the duties was to vote and to have the privilege or duty, however you see it, to serve as a jury of my peers.
Yeah.
And yet we have so many people who just take that for granted or sit back and say, I don't know enough, or it's not going to make a difference. But the very core principle of a constitutional republic is that we are engaged, that we understand that we are the king of America, right? And that we elect people to represent us. And if we don't engage, someone else is choosing who to represent us. And
that's right, brother. The cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. I'm so happy that you're here in the States with us. I love what you're doing at Father's House Church, and but you hit on so much there. So let's rattle off a couple. Yes, my father did write a book right before the last election that was exactly what you were just talking about. How complacency is there's sins of commission, things that you do that are wrong, but there are sins of omission, things that you don't do. Pastor Ken Hampton in near Detroit, we were with him a while back, and he said, you can't sit on the fence anymore. The devil owns the fence. Now, in this book, Silence Equals Consent, the sin of omission, we talk about the history of what you just said, where that idea of being so holy that we don't participate in politics came from. It's people that withdraw and they say, if you're really spiritual, you don't do worldly things. So you don't go to bars and brothels, and you don't participate in government. And it's like, wait,
Yep.
what's that last thing? Well, we believe that, yes, you need to have a personal experience with Jesus, but wouldn't it be nice to leave a country behind for your children and your children's children to have an opportunity to have that experience? So we go through it legally, historically, biblically, showing that, yes, when you are silent in the face of evil, that is you giving your consent. Just like at a wedding ceremony, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you're being silent, you're saying, I agree to this ceremony. If a bill gets on the president's desk and it just sits there for 10 days and he does nothing, it goes into law as if he had signed it. And then one of my favorite examples is Numbers 20. And you have Moses and Aaron, and the Lord speaks to them, and he tells Moses to speak to the rock. Waters will flow forth abundantly. Moses goes to the rock. He hits it once. He hits it twice. Water flows forth. Then the chapter ends. And the next chapter, the Lord says, Aaron and you will not enter the promised land. And you think, well, wait, what did Aaron do? We just read the chapter. I don't think he said a thing the whole time. And that's just it. He saw Moses hit the rock the first time, and maybe that caught him off guard. But the second time, you get the impression that he could have said, whoa, I was there. I heard the Lord say, speak to the rock. And just like that, just like that, he sinned and did not enter the promised land. So here we are, a covenant nation. As you mentioned, we are not like every other country. Yep. We are citizens. Now, citizen, that's a Latin word that comes from, it implies co-sovereign, co-ruler, co-king. So as citizens, we have the responsibility and the privilege to participate in governing ourselves throughout most of history. It is subjects. So you have kings, pharaohs, sultans, kaisers, caliphs, czars, anything where power concentrates at the top. Yeah. And what are the people that live underneath that rule called? Subjects. And they are often subjected to the arbitrary will of the monarch, the tyrant, the ruler. It's not like that in the United States. We get to participate. That's why people want to demoralize you, because since we govern ourselves, they say, look, if we can sway them one way or the other, especially without them realizing that we're doing it, then we can have them play into our hand. So we are battling a lot, but we can't sit on the sidelines. Not now. The Lord will hold us accountable for that.
It's so true, and I think as a church, we're so afraid of offending people that we shy back from speaking anything. And we've had this conversation, as staff in our church too, because there's always hard truths in the Bible, right? And if we have this idea that we don't want to talk about it because we will offend someone, well, the truth to be told, hopefully in any church there are new people there every week or every so often at least, right? But if you have people there, at what point do you then start bringing up these hard things? Because, maybe the ones who were new 6 months ago have learned a bit more and are ready for some of the harder truths, but you'll still have new people. So you just got to have that part of your everyday conversation as a church, that as Scripture approaches topics or as things are happening in a culture, we as pastors need to disciple our church, and that includes how to approach the issues of the day, because otherwise we have a faith that's really a theory only, that only works within inside the walls of the church. We need to have a faith that can stand it and can help us navigate the things in our workplace, in our schools, because otherwise, what point is it? Unless we are salty, then the world is not going to taste Jesus in us. And I think looking in scriptures, I'm hard-pressed to find places where Jesus is condemning believers for being presumptuous. Most of the times, if not all the times, when Jesus is correcting believers, it's because they have not faith, because they're not speaking out, because they're not acting, not because they acted in faith and failed. And I think we are so afraid of missing God that we would rather not address anything. But God's heart is for us to step out in faith. And we'll mess up, but I believe we have a Holy Spirit that will then correct us and lead us back to the truth. But if we stay out of the fray, we will definitely, like you say, be guilty of the sin of omission and of the sin of consent. And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as pastors, my father and I travel the country. We get to meet mostly courageous pastors at this point, but we understand that when you're trying to grow your church, sometimes the bitter message isn't the most fun to share. But you don't want church to only be a place where you come to just make everyone feel like everything's okay. I use analogies a lot, and if you're the shepherd of your flock and there's a bunch of wolves outside and you just say, hey, everything's going to be fine, and then you let them go outside and without telling them that, hey, there are wolves, some of you are going to need
Yep.
to be sheepdogs and actually stand up. It's another way of saying it is if you have a real good friend that trusts you and they put on this terrible outfit and they come ask you, hey, does this look good? Well, you could spare yourself the trouble and say, I don't want to have this conversation. Yeah, it looks fine. And then they go out and everyone starts to rag on them when you could have said, you know what, instead of sparing myself the difficult conversation, I'm going to make sure that I do what's going to benefit them the most. So
Yep.
it may be a little bit of a challenging conversation. You may have a few people that you kind of ruffle their feathers the wrong way, but the majority of the people are going to eventually make it to the place where they say, I'm really glad that Pastor is talking about important, relevant things. When he's able to, he invites us in here and he makes it a sanctuary and he makes it a place where we can just feel good about everything. But if there's something big happening in the world or in our country, I'm very grateful for any pastors that stand up and teach what needs to be taught. My father, the best compliment you ever get from him is that person has backbone. They're courageous when it matters most. And so we are seeing a lot of pastors become examples of this, but there's still far too many that they appreciate the comfort of sitting on the sidelines. We talked about South Korea a little bit, and I just feel like it's necessary to mention. We have
Yep.
a shining example of a young man who was able to connect faith to stewardship of the nation, faith to stewardship of your family, your community, and of your nation. And before we started, Sam, we were mentioning South Korea, and
Yep.
I'll talk about that for just 1 second here.
Please.
So I knew Charlie for almost 12 years. He was an incredible individual. He's one of those rare people that as he grew in influence, he actually grew in compassion, and he was
Yep.
just so genuine. And he didn't leave the country often, but my father and I were with Pastor Rob McCoy in South Korea. Now we flew in to Incheon, then to Busan, where Seguro Church is. Pastor Son has a mega church. He's able to organize millions of South Koreans in the streets to protest things. So he's one of those courageous pastors that we know and
Yes.
love. And he has been behind bars. 4 days after our visit to South Korea, he was arrested, and he is still behind bars. From what I hear, he's not being treated fairly. He's lost over 30 pounds. His poor sons are doing everything they can to combat this injustice and this lawfare that's being used against him. But what we see is when there aren't enough courageous pastors, the government wants to usurp the role of God. So if you have a pyramid, God's at the top. What's the first thing a tyrant wants to do anytime they come into a nation? They want to push God out of the top so then the state can become the ultimate authority. Now, one thing that warmed my heart while we were over there, Mina Kim, she's the founder of Build Up Korea. Fantastic organization. I urge your audience to check it out. She basically saw what Charlie was doing in the United States and decided there's a real need for that in South Korea. And so this is the part that warms my heart. We go to Build Up Korea. I think it's the second or third annual. So really just in a short time, she's grown this. It's well attended. If you've ever been to an America Fest, there's one coming up in December. My father and I will be there. These are phenomenal events. These are the real deal. Well attended. When people walk out, there's loud intros, fireworks, you name it. And so Charlie gets there, and we walk into Build Up Korea, and we're all looking at it. And at one point, Charlie and I are sitting in the back room, and he watches one of the walkouts, and he sees the fireworks, and he hears the loud announcement, and he takes out his phone and he starts to record, and he says, "This is so cool." And it just kind of dawned on me, and the more I reflect on it, the more I kind of appreciate it. But he got to see in his lifetime that he was so much more than an acute change in the United States. He was so much more than a crucial figure in a pivotal election. No, he was the person who became the blueprint for how to connect faith to stewardship of your nation, not just in the United States, but in South Korea. So we need everyone to be doing that. And there's a perfect model for how to do it. And the youth are excited to do it right now.
Yeah. And I think Korea is a good example too. And I know Pastor Rob McCoy has mentioned this many times, how the difference between the North and the South and what happened after the armistice, right? You had the North who had all the agriculture, they had all the natural resources, and the South was just mountains basically. And but because of the freedom that was brought as America and other nations stood in the gap as the communist was coming from the North, the freedom that was won enabled South Korea to be one of the biggest economies in the world. And I've used the picture of Korea at night, where you have a dark North Korea and you have this lit up. The whole South is lit up, and it's such a good picture of the difference between freedom and communism, right? But yet, I think Korea is a very scary example of how quickly things can change. Yeah. You might know more, but basically, the most recent president that came in because of unfettered immigration and very, I think Pastor Rob said that any immigrant that's been in the country for 4 months could vote. So basically, by bringing in all these Chinese immigrants, they were able to, in a sense, rig the election to have this communist become president, who then was able to
and not only
jail
that,
the pastor, right?
Yes. So whenever the previous president brought up questions about the validity, because there was a lot of election, the integrity of the election was being questioned everywhere, even in South Korea. When the last day we were touring around the malls, there was still a bunch of signs saying "Stop the steal." But what happens is the legitimate president, prior to the one who's in office now, basically he's arrested as soon as the new president is put in for asking questions about the election integrity. He's released, then he's arrested again, and his wife, and they're still in prison now. So there's a lot of news coming out. I mean, between Pastor Rob and my father and myself, we've been telling everyone we can. It seems like there's a lot more attention, but we still need more. But it's just what you said. It's the corruption in the government. When you read through the history of North and South Korea, you get the idea that there's this tug of war, that some of the leaders in South Korea fully believe in freedom and want to model the United States. But then you get some where you see these sunshine laws and things where it's like an unlimited amount of resources can be given to North Korea. And you start to kind of see that there's been this battle. And what we're seeing now, it's like the rope has been pulled, the side of freedom has been pulled into the mud. And unless someone comes and helps, namely the paragon of freedom in the world, the United States, South Korea is going to have to do everything they can to defeat this on their own. And that's a formidable challenge. I do want to say the imagery that you use there with the lights. So Charlie, actually, he mentioned that this was the last speech I got to hear him say live. And I messaged him after. I said, "That might be the best speech you've given, brother. Well done." And he messaged back, "I pray it was well received. Always humble, never assuming." Yeah. But he mentioned that, just like you did, how North Korea, very dark except for around Pyongyang. You'll have some lights there. South Korea, full of lights. And he would zoom in on South Korea, then the values of the South Koreans and the hearts and minds of South Koreans. But what you find is that the South Koreans and the Americans, I mean, we share a similar story. They've been one of our greatest allies since 1945. And if we don't know what's going on there, it's hard to intervene. But I think just having this conversation like we are right now, it's helpful. I think people just need to find out what's happening in South Korea. There are organizations like Mercury One that have been
Yep.
helping in a lot of ways. So we're grateful for them. And anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that picture of the light, I think it's so important that to remember that one of the illustrations in the Sermon on the Mount was, the salt and the light. And the thing with the light is that when the light comes on, there's no battle. The darkness has to flee. It is not. It's not really a tug of war, right? It's instant. The light comes on, but the moment that light goes out, darkness is what happens. And I love what John Stott is talking about. That for us as believers, it's so easy to bemoan the state of the world, to be upset with how horrible things are and where things are going. But the key is, if it's going to be dark if we are not light. That's just the natural state of the world. It's darkness, it's corruption, it's human nature. We're fallen beings, right? And we need Jesus to come and bring that light. And when we are allowing His light to shine in us, then darkness has to flee. It is so important, so important. The last time we met in person was at Charlie's memorial service, and I love the analogy of the light with Charlie as well. How he was on fire for the Lord, and like you said, the more recent, the more on fire for Jesus it seems like he's been. Initially it seems to have started as more a political thing, but I remember being at Amfest in, I think it was 2023 maybe, and he was more bold than ever about the importance of believers engaging in the arena, and how we need to be not just in the public square of politics, but we need to be in the arts and entertainment, in the media, in education, in journalism, in government and business. We need to allow God to use us. And I think, again, we've fallen into this trap, and it kind of ties into the silence is consent, right? Where we've fallen into the trap of thinking that we're to have a private faith. That, it's good for you if you follow Jesus, but don't let it affect your work. Don't talk about it at school. But that's just a lie from the pit of hell. We need to be engaging wherever we're at, because if God has transformed my heart, it should transform my life, and it should transform wherever I put my foot. If I'm in a workplace, that place should be better because I'm, as a believer, is there because God is in me and is working in me and through me. The same with education, the same with families, right? And it was, I think God is on the move, and I think Charlie's assassination and his faith in the midst of opposition has given us an open door to share our faith in a whole new way. I think it's an opportunity to be bolder, and I've seen across social media, and I've seen in personal interaction, people that I didn't know where they were at politically or even with their faith have stepped up in a whole different level since Charlie almost gave permission to be bold, as he talked about how he wanted to be remembered for his faith, right, and for his courage. And I think as a church, it is so important that we step into that. So I heard a story from a church in California where a friend's son was part of the youth ministry, and the day Charlie was assassinated, this youth ministry normally had 30, 40 kids show up, and 300 young adults showed up because they just needed something. And the pastor didn't say a word about Charlie. And as a result, I think they missed that opportunity. We missed that Kairos moment in time. Because I know for our church and many other churches around the world, well, especially in the U.S., but even around the world, I think too, there's a new openness, a new hunger. Because when church stands for truth, and we are willing to speak it despite opposition, there's something that attracts. Because people are looking for truth. They know the world is not right, and they're wanting someone to tell them and help them make sense of the world. So ever since that happened that Sunday, every single Sunday, we had more people than Easter, which is kind of unusual for our church, right? Easter is the big Sunday, but God is on the move. Last Sunday alone, we had 35 people getting saved and rededicated for the Lord, and this is not our norm. And but because we have to meet that moment and step into that, and I love what you're doing in equipping the church and pastors to speak truth. And I love the title of your latest book, but the whole issue of winsome Christianity, I think that's a thing of the past. The world is looking for people who are willing to be courageous and stand for truth. And will they find that in the church? That's the question. So,
yeah. Well, Sam, you and I were both at that memorial, and you probably remember that when Vance there were a lot of eruptions, a lot of enthusiastic applause, but one that really stands out to me was when J.D. Vance said, look, I've been more vocal about my belief in Jesus, about my faith in the past 2 weeks than I have been in the past 20 years as a politician. That, there were a lot of responses from the crowd, but that one particularly, it just felt like an eruption. And I couldn't help but think that maybe more people will see how the audience responded to that. Maybe that will embolden other politicians to be a little more vocal about not just incorporating their biblical morals into their decision making, but being vocal about it, letting people know. And just like you said, courageous Christianity. I've been using this one a little bit, so excuse me, it's a bit messed up, but there's a time when the history. And calling back our previous conversation, or what we were saying earlier today, when you understand the history, you get to realize who is a pawn on someone's chessboard and who is actually propagating the lie. Now, we need the courageous Christian to stand up against those who are propagating the lies. And just like with all strength, true strength is often shown by compassion. When you're very strong, you don't need to, if there's a lion, it doesn't need to go attack a rabbit that's playing next to him. He'll probably just lay there until there is an actual threat. When you're strong, you're able to be compassionate. And so whenever you see the history of this, you see that, okay, a lot of people are just, unfortunately, they're duped. They've been sold a bill of goods, and we need to try to educate them. And if there's someone who's actually propagating the lie, they know it's a lie, they know they're dividing the American people, those are the ones we need to stand firm against. There's a book that I mention sometimes, but it's Power versus Force, The Hidden Determinants of Human Behavior by Dr. David R. Hawkins. It's a lot of clinical data, maybe not the most fun book to read, but to sum it up, I use an analogy. Take a beach ball, toss that beach ball on the water, it's going to float. It'll float indefinitely. Now take that beach ball and shove it underwater. The moment you move even one hand, it pops right back up to the surface. What we're battling often is forceful movements from the enemy. They need to continually apply pressure. But if we can figure out what they're doing, and it's kind of like when you see a magician perform the magic trick and you see how it's all done, it kind of loses that mystery, that awe. Right. It's the same thing with what the enemy's doing. They want to demoralize, destabilize, use crisis, and then normalize. They want to divide us over and over. They want to use the Hegel and Marx Hegelian dialectic to continually move the marker real subtly. So when we look back, we say, I don't remember it all changing at once, but this is certainly not the country I grew up in. And so all this is happening, but basically when we are standing on a powerful foundation. They want to keep us ignorant of that fact and use force to try to sway the public. If we can remain on that powerful foundation, meaning where Jesus wants us, where God wants us to be as a country, we are a covenant nation. The word federal actually translates to covenant. That means we have an agreement with God on how we're going to govern this nation. When we do that, we invite blessings. When we allow ourselves to be deceived and then half of us are going down the wrong way, then it's kind of like, the analogy my father and I use is magnets. When I want to honor God side is facing God's I want to bless you side, it sticks. Now, even if God wants to bless you, if you sin, it's like your magnet flips and it won't touch no matter how hard you try. As a nation, we've allowed ourselves to be deceived. Now we are breaking the covenant we've made with God and we are inviting judgment upon ourselves. We need to get back to that powerful foundation that's standing on truth, standing on knowing Jesus, instead of letting these forceful movements divide us. And just like with force, if a car is driving up a hill and you take your foot off the gas, that car rolls back downhill. If we can expose these tactics and show the American people that we're being divided by enemies of all of us, then I believe that we can unite and hopefully return ourselves to a place where we're not just affording freedom to citizens here in the United States, but we can help other countries that want to pursue freedom and be an example of what that looks like. Yep.
And then coming back to Charlie, he used to say that he wanted people to row in the streams of liberty, and as they do, they'll come to the source of liberty, which is Jesus.
Amen.
And that's what it comes back to, right? It's because of Jesus we do this. We're not trying to lord it over anyone. We're not trying to control. We're not trying to force our values on anyone. But we just know that Jesus loves the world, and he loves the people in the world, and that we have been given a command to speak truth in love and to love our neighbor, and that interprets in being engaged in politics, in the marketplace, in all these places where we can show him, because our hope is, as we are engaging, as we show that there's a better way. God has a way that is for life, and life in all its fullness. And if we can show that to people by a transformed life that we live, and as we transform the world to become a better place, our hope is that they would find him in the process. So thank you so much for taking the time. It's a thrill to have you on. I'm excited to see you here in a few weeks at AmFest. And I know our paths will cross again, but I'm really happy to have you on, Michael. And I look forward to see how God is going to continue to use you and lead you. And how can people find out more about you and your ministry?
Well, thank you so much, Sam. It's always an honor to be with you, and I'm so excited about what you're doing. So I can't wait to come see you at Father's House Church again. But for anything Bill Federer or now Team American Minute, AmericanMinute.com. Thank you for that. You can follow us on Instagram's growing very rapidly. It's _American Minute. But AmericanMinute.com will connect you to everything. Our newest book is Courageous Christianity. As we mentioned, it talks about the Second Great Awakening. It starts with Charles Finney, and you kind of see how his obedience in the Lord's timing turns into something that the Lord can multiply. So when we work in our own time, we can add, sometimes subtract. But when we work in the Lord's timing, he multiplies our efforts. We saw what Charlie was able to do by being faithful, by being logical and not emotional, by standing on a powerful foundation, not a forceful one. William Penn said, "'Tis persuasion alone that makes converts. Force makes hypocrites." We're not trying to force anything on anyone. We want to invite them into knowing Jesus, because that will give them this cascade of benefits that just flows into every area of their life. And by having a free country, you're able to pursue that relationship with Jesus. So it's always such an honor to be with you, Sam. Thank you for encouraging me. To your audience, I was very comfortable just being behind the scenes. I guess I have a lot to say today, but I'm just comfortable here with my good friend Sam. So please check out everything that he's doing too at Father's House Church.
Oh, you're most kind. You're most kind. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to get to know you the last year and a half or so, and every time we meet, it's a blast. So looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks, and thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to follow the American Minute, all their places online, and there's a wealth of information, and I cannot recommend their books enough. Their socialism book, King of America, you name it. It's I've probably read 10 of the books, and it's helped really educate myself in the foundations that we have here in America, and how faith has been such an integral part in that. So make sure to check them out, and look forward to see what's coming next in regards to books, but also how God is going to use you, Michael. So thank you so much for watching this. We appreciate it, Michael. All the best, and please say hi to your dad, and can't wait to see you next. So you guys take care, and God bless.